So this is the 2028 Global Intelligence Crisis, okay? A thought exercise in financial history from the future. And this post has been going viral today. I took a look through it and I want to share it with you because it really gives a scenario of this AI-driven economy and how to think about it, right? Here's the question. What if our AI bullishness continues to be right? And what if that's actually bearish? So for example, what if the AI actually works? What does that do to the economy? What follows is a scenario, not a prediction, and they're kind of modeling out all the different ways that you can think about the future and how it affects the economy. So I thought this was really clever, right? The dated February 22nd, 2026 crossed out, and this is from the future, June 30th, 2028. So predictions of what could happen. Okay, the unemployment rate then printed 10.2%, so double it of unemployment. And then you have the market sold off 2% on the number, bringing the cumulative drawdown in the S&P to 38%. So we're looking at a market crash from the highs of 2026, but happening, less than 2 years later, actually, in 2028. Traders have grown numb. 6 months ago, a print like this would have triggered a circuit breaker, meaning that they've been kind of seeing this downward spiral. Some of the stuff they were talking about here, the headline numbers were great. Nominal GDP repeatedly printed mid to high single-digit annualized growth. So you can brag about the GDP, but you have to remember not everyone's going to participate in this. Productivity was booming. Real output per hour rose at rates not seen since the 1950s, driven by AI agents that don't sleep, take sick days, or require health insurance. Okay, so the GDP numbers could be good, but not everyone will necessarily be happy or, I guess, celebrate in that, because really what it is, it's the owners of compute. So the people who own the data centers and such, right, those big tech, saw their wealth explode as labor costs vanished. Meanwhile, real wage growth collapsed. Okay, K-shaped economy. T economy, if you want to say the top or stay at the top and the bottom half to sink. Despite the administration's repeated boasts of record productivity, white-collar workers lost jobs to machines and were forced into lower-paying jobs. And I like this here, the ghost GDP is what they refer to as. When cracks began appearing in consumer economy, economic pundits popularized the phrase ghost GDP. Ghost GDP. Output that shows up in the national accounts but never circulates through the real economy. It's like the Reaganomics trickle down that never actually trickles, right? Ghost GDP. In every way, the AI was exceeding expectations and the market was AI. The only problem, the economy was not. It's really interesting. That's why everyone's talking about this today. The human-centric consumer economy, 70% of the GDP at the time, referring to now, again, this is from the future, we probably could have figured out this sooner if we had just asked how much money machines spend on discretionary goods. Hint, it's zero, right? You replace all the workers with the AI robots, you got no longer have an economy, It was a negative feedback loop with no natural break. The human intelligence displacement spiral. Another interesting phrase, the human intelligence displacement spiral. White-collar workers saw their earnings power and rationally their spending structurally impaired, right? So you don't have a job, you don't got any money. Their incomes were bedrock of the 13 trillion mortgage market. So what do you think is going to happen to the mortgage market, right? You guys get this, how it all kind of ricochets through the markets. The first wave of defaults due to AI disruption in mid-2027 challenged that assumption. So these dates are probably a little bit faster than what's realistic, but I mean, you never know in some of these industries. This is what we're talking about today, like software stocks were getting scared. This is today, but I want to go back to this because it's connected. This came out kind of the same day we had the Anthropic announcement with COBOL and IBM crashed today. We talked about this on the prior video. This would be manageable if the disruption remained contained to software, but it didn't, right? So it starts to spread. By the end of 2027, it threatened every business model predicted on intermediation. Swaths of companies built on monetization friction for humans disintegrated. The November 2027 crash. So their sort of prediction here is like next year crash. We've been waiting for the bad news is good news for almost a year now. The government is starting to consider proposals, but public faith in the ability to of the government to stage any sort of rescue has dwindled. I'm just thinking about this. Like when I read through this, and I'm going with you right now. Like you have the combination of this new technology bubble in the market, plus what if the AI does work, and then you have just a completely inept Trump administration when just setting up for disaster. So that's why this whole thing is like, it reads like a sci-fi thing, but it's some of this stuff is plausible. It says here we're talking about Claude code and Codex, so people started to adapt this stuff. Agentic AI, that was the conversation, right? And then these would be some of the headlines coming in, later this year. Then announces 15% workforce reduction and structural efficiency program shares fall 18%, right? You have these software companies are then going to race to the bottom to get the lowest prices. You're also firing people, right? Incumbents were raced to the bottom of pricing, a knife fight with both each other and with the new crop of upstart challengers. Because now you have a barrier to entry to do these kind of software services much, much lower, theoretically, if you could code everything like what AI is promising, right? When Fortune 500 clients cut 15% of their workforce, they cancel 15% of their licenses. You fire people, you don't need those subscriptions anymore. What else were they supposed to do? Sit still and die slower? The companies most threatened by AI became the AI's most aggressive adopters. So interesting. And then we're comparing this to like Kodak, right? Blockbuster, BlackBerry, or these companies that used to be king are no longer around. Stocks now down 40 to 60%. Boards demanding answers. The AI threatened companies did the only thing they could: cut headcount, redeploy the savings into AI tools, use those tools to maintain output with lower costs. So it's like this loop, this downward spiral. By early 2027, so we're talking about next year, LLM usage had become the default. People were using AI agents who didn't even know what an agent was. In the same way people never learned what cloud computing was, used streaming services, right? They thought of the same way they thought auto-complete or spell check thing their phone just did now. And that's actually a good point. Once regular people start using this stuff, more widespread, then we're here, and they don't think of it as being AI necessarily. It's just, I thought the autocomplete is an interesting one. I actually dislike autocomplete on the phone. I hate that sometimes. It doesn't, you guys know, when you type anything on your phone, it'll fill in a word and it's not what you want, and it's like hard to fix it sometimes. There's certain words that you want to spell a certain way that won't let you do it. But this is more than we're going to be talking all about token spend and AI, right? Commerce stopped being a series of discrete human decisions and became continuous optimization process. So robots talking to robots, basically running 24/7 on behalf of every connected consumer. By March 2027, the median individual in United States was consuming 400,000 tokens per day, 10x the end of 2026. So more and more people are using this stuff. So this is all predictions or scenarios, what they call it, which I think it's fun to read this stuff because it's some of the stuff really makes sense. And there was a thing that I really liked what they were talking about here was the sort of brand loyalty or loyalty in business, that kind of stuff, where robots wouldn't have that, where we go shopping just out of convenience or out of habit. AI can compare prices and such. That's sort of what they're talking about here. Says it started out simple enough. AI agents remove friction, right? Subscriptions and memberships that pass are renewed despite months of disuse. So then your AI would cut all the stuff that you forgot you should cut. Like all this stuff. Consumer agents began to change nearly all consumer transactions, how they worked. Humans don't really have the time to price match across 5 competing platforms before buying a box of protein bars. Machines do. So that'll force everyone then to drop prices, right? This will affect financial advice, tax prep, legal work. I will navigate complexity that you find tedious. That would be sort of the AI value proposition. Real estate will be affected. We had overestimated the value of, quote, human relationships. Turns out that a lot of what people called relationships was simply friction with a friendly face. Funny. And I wonder, like in this sort of future, something I was thinking about as well is we had a holiday recently here in Korea as a Lunar New Year. And my wife's cousins have a kid, probably maybe less than 2 years. So, still in the months. but they put a screen in front of her, which I thought, in my opinion, is really early. But everyone has their own decision on that stuff. But I think for many people, being in front of a screen is going to be their world, right? So, or having an AI do a bunch of stuff for you, and you're not going to be thinking anymore. I think that's going to be a lot of people's world going forward. A lot of young people, right, are in early and earlier are adopting to this digital world. Because I've heard the argument that, hey, I need my kid to get used to screen time and things like that, because that is the fruit of your work life, maybe. So that's something I was thinking about, where they're mentioning that, what was the phrase here? We had overestimated the value of human relationships. Turns out a lot of people called relationships was simply friction with a friendly face. So dealing with people is such a hassle, right? They don't get tired talking about AI. They don't get tired and accept the easiest option or default. I always just order from here. Talking about loyalty. That destroyed a particular type of moat, habitual intermediation. And then they're talking about DoorDash, or how essentially there's a low barrier to entry and anyone can code, a quick startup company like that. It's going to affect credit cards and such. MasterCard Q1 2027, again, just sort of predictions in the future. Net revenues 6% year over year. Purchase volume growth slows 3.4%, from 5.9 prior. Agent-led price optimization and pressures in discretionary categories. And they have these really interesting charts to look at. But again, a lot of this basically is you're destroying the worker, which hence destroys the economy. And only people who own the compute are going to survive in this and do well. The U.S. economy is a white-collar service economy. White-collar workers represent 50% of employment and drove 75% of discretionary spending. So if they're the ones who face the most, scare from the AI, replace those kind of jobs, what does that do to your economy? Again, that's consumer-based. Agents handle weeks-long research and development tasks, exponentially steamroll our conceptions of what was possible, even though every year Wharton professors tried to fit the data to new sigmoid. And they have a chart here of all the various versions of Claude that keeps coming out and changing everything. And then you're going to get headlines like these. This is interesting to read. U.S. JOLTS, jobs openings fall below 5.5 million. Unemployed to open ratios climb to 1.7, highest since August, right? So basically your job market is going to be awful. White collar openings were collapsing. Blue collar openings remained relatively stable. So that might end up being true, right? That the AI is more of a threat to white collar than blue collar. The churn was in jobs that write memos. We somehow still in business approve budgets and keep middle layers of the economy lubricated, right? So then you're going to be okay if you're in construction, healthcare, or trades. That might be true, actually. AI got better and cheaper. Companies laid off workers and then used the savings to buy more AI capability, right? And that's the feedback loop. You keep firing people, you save money, you buy more AI to fire more people. And then the interesting discussion was also in other countries. So how would that play out? India was the inverse. The country's IT service sector exported over $200 billion annually, the single largest contributor to India's current account surplus, and offset that finances persistent goods trade. The entire model was built on one value proposition. Indian developers cost a fraction of their American counterparts. But the marginal cost of the AI coding agent had collapsed too, essentially the cost of electricity. TCS, Infosys, Wipro saw contract cancellations accelerate through 2027. The rupee fell 18% against the dollar in 4 months as a service surplus had been anchored. India's external accounts evaporated. By 2028, the IMF had begun preliminary discussions with New Delhi, like a bailout from the IMF. So if everything's going to be, cheaper with AI, then some of the countries that, can say, hey, we have cheaper labor, we're cheaper than the Americans, come work with us. But what if we just skip, that part entirely and just go with only the robots? That's another scenario that could disrupt trade. It's something that's very interesting. That'll hurt their economy also. And then we just had that thing in India. So I think that's why they include that in here. And I covered that in a prior video where Altman was there and Anthropic Dario was there. Then this gives you an idea of like pay structures would change. A friend of ours was a senior product manager at Salesforce in 2025, right? Title, health insurance, 401k, $180,000 a year. She lost her job in the third round of layoffs. After 6 months of searching, she started driving for Uber. Earnings dropped to $45,000, right? So it's just, Then you have all these overqualified people flood to the gig economy. The top 10% of earners account for more than 50% of all consumer spending in the US. The top 20% account for roughly 65%. These are people who buy the houses, the cars, the vacations, the restaurant meals, the private school tuition, the home renovations. They are demand based the entire consumer discretionary economy. So the idea would be if you hit to white collar, you lose all of that stuff, right? And you'll get these sort of headlines regarding Moody's downgrades, 18 billion, the private equity-backed software debt. We just talked about the debt thing in the prior article. Like this thing is all, they're using all sort of playing out the current situation that we're in and just like how would this affect markets? You got Zillow then, value index 11%, San Francisco, Seattle, Austin. So those would be your big tech cities, right? Because if those workers are, say coders and people in that stuff don't have jobs, then that obviously, yes, real estate would crash there. And it's interesting that they're comparing it to the 2008 crash to 2028 crash, right? Again, the prediction here. And the big difference was that they're saying the loans were bad on day one in 2008, but say with the loans made to say someone in Austin, for example, or Seattle, like if you're in a tech hub or the San Francisco, like you actually had a high paying job. You at that time could afford a house at that crazy, prices. But then your job just took a massive hit, right? So it was very different than '08. The intelligence displacement spiral has two financial accelerants to the real economy, right? So kind of go as AI gets better, companies need fewer workers spend less, economy weakens, companies invest more in AI, right? So that's the feedback loop. And then you're talking about real economy, financial system, policy response, right? So then the Trump people, whoever's in power, will have to come up with stuff to address all these people who don't have jobs. Is basically what it is, right? The government needs to transfer more money to households. So if you're talking about universal basic income or whatever, or more welfare programs essentially, but they don't have as much money from taxes, right? The government needs to transfer more money to households at precisely the moment it is collecting less money from taxes. It's fascinating stuff. And then you could have, like in the future, the government would have the Transition Economy Act or the Shared AI Prosperity Act. Like how would you name these things? People are protesting outside of OpenAI and outside of Anthropic. And then here's the final. It says the first time in history, the most productive asset in the economy has produced fewer, not more jobs. Nobody's framework fits because none were designed for a world where the scarce input became abundant. So we have make new frameworks. Whether we build them in time is the only question that matters. But you're not reading this in June 2028, you're reading this in February 2026. The S&P is near all-time highs. The negative feedback loop have not begun. We are certain some of these scenarios won't materialize. Okay, we are certain some of these scenarios won't materialize. We're equally certain that the machine intelligence will continue to accelerate. I agree. The premium on human intelligence will narrow. I can see that. And as investors still have access, how much of our portfolios are built upon assumptions that won't survive the decade. As a society, we still have time to be proactive. The canary is still alive. And that's what was one of the things that was shaking up the markets today. And we've seen software stocks crash. We saw, essentially Trump disrupting global trade. And then you'll see various, sectors trying to make moves of like, okay, we're firing people, but hey, we're investing in AI. And then they just played this whole thing out as what it would look like less than 2 years from now if this accelerates, which some parts it will. I think so in some certain areas. But I understand the pushback then. People who are heavily into coding stuff is like, no, this is way, way overplayed. I think it's just going to depend on what industry and in what ways, right? And how fast this stuff develops. So that's my thoughts on this. I want to hear yours. What do you think about this sort of sci-fi dystopian future that we're looking at? And I'll catch you on the next video.